After the Second World War ended, the whole world was looking for justice, and they found a place for it in a German city called Nuremberg. The goal, of course, was to hold the architects of the Third Reich accountable. But underneath all the legal arguments, a much deeper, far more unsettling question was brewing.
It's the question that really hung over that entire trial. I mean, think about it. When you picture the men responsible for the Holocaust, for a war that engulfed the planet, what comes to mind? Well, at the time, everyone thought they knew the answer.
People absolutely expected to see inhuman freaks sitting in the defendant's box. Men so fundamentally different from the rest of us that their capacity for evil would finally make some kind of sense. And believe it or not, even the allied psychologists who were brought in to examine them, they were expecting the very same thing. They truly believed their scientific tools, their ink blots, their IQ tests, the whole shebang, would uncover some profound sickness, a unique kind of broken mind that could explain everything. But what they actually found was far, far more disturbing. So that brings us to our first big question: monsters or men? This whole psychological investigation was led by two Americans, a psychiatrist named Douglas Kelley and a psychologist, Gustave Gilbert. They were sent into the Nuremberg prison with what turned out to be a mission with two very different layers. And this contrast is absolutely crucial. Officially, their job was pretty simple: determine if the 22 top Nazi defendants were even sane enough to stand trial. But secretly, unofficially, both men were on a much bigger hunt. They wanted to answer a question for all of humanity. What kind of person does this? All right, let's go inside the prison with them for those first encounters. Just imagine walking into that cold, gray, stone building, fully expecting to meet monsters. For the psychologists, what they saw right away just shattered every single one of their expectations. Take Hitler's former second-in-command, Hermann Goering. He wasn't some ranting madman. No, he was witty, he was intelligent, he was almost friendly, debating politics with Dr. Kelley as if they were old university colleagues. And the others? They played different parts. The loyal soldier just following orders, the quiet bureaucrat who claimed he was always a moderate. Almost none of them fit that monster profile. So after hours and hours of interviews, Kelley's first official finding was crystal clear. These men were sane. They understood the charges perfectly, they knew what they had done, and they were fully connected to reality. So, if they weren't insane, then what were they? To dig deeper, Kelley and Gilbert brought out all the formal tools of their trade. They ran a whole battery of psychological tests, really hoping they could find that one hidden flaw, the key that would finally unlock the Nazi mind. And the very first piece of data that came back was a shocker. Their average IQ score? 130. That is firmly in the superior range of intelligence. So not only were they sane, they were highly intelligent. This wasn't ignorance or stupidity at work, not by a long shot. So what about the Rorschach inkblot tests? Surely that would reveal the monster, right? Nope. They didn't find some unique Nazi brain. Instead, they found personality types you could find in any office building in the world. Ambitious guys obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder, cold technicians focused on the job, anxious followers desperate to please their bosses. In a truly terrifying way, they were normal. The clinical tests all pointed to normalcy. But Gustave Gilbert, one of the psychologists, started having these late-night, off-the-record chats with the prisoners. And in those quiet moments, he started to hear something else. Or rather, he noticed a consistent and chilling pattern of something that was missing. A profound psychological void. That void was empathy. That basic human ability to understand and feel what another person is feeling. Time and time again, whenever Gilbert would bring up the millions of victims, the defendants' reactions were just shockingly self-centered. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? They would always pivot the conversation right back to themselves. Their lost careers, their tarnished honor, the so-called unfairness of the trial. All their sorrow, all their emotional energy was reserved entirely for their own misfortune, not for the absolute catastrophe they'd unleashed on the world. The findings from Nuremberg would eventually give rise to this really powerful concept that helps explain this terrifying disconnect. It's an idea that was coined a few years later by the philosopher Hannah Arendt. Arendt argued that evil can look ordinary. It can even look boring. It's not always the raving fanatic. Sometimes it's the bureaucrat who just stamps papers without asking what they're for, the manager who's obsessed with efficiency and quotas, the person who just does their job inside a monstrous system without ever looking up. And this is basically the psychological playbook for how it happens. Step 1, you use language to dehumanize. People are no longer people. They're units to be processed or cases to be filed. Step 2, you hide inside the bureaucracy. You focus on the paperwork, the schedules, the logistics, anything that the human result. And finally, step 3, you just follow orders, no questions asked. You shield yourself with that ultimate excuse, I was just doing my job. So, what's the ultimate takeaway from this whole journey into the minds of the Nazi elite? Well, it brings us to a final and pretty haunting conclusion.
Even at the very, very end, control was everything. Sentenced to hang, Hermann Goering cheated the executioner. He took a hidden cyanide pill. He refused to let anyone else write the final chapter of his story. That massive ego, that desperate need for control, it was there right until his last breath.
And this right here is the conclusion that haunted Dr. Kelley for the rest of his life. These defendants weren't a different species. They weren't monsters from another planet. Their sanity, their intelligence, their normalcy, that was the most dangerous thing about them. Because it meant their capacity for evil wasn't some unique disease. The traits that allowed them to do what they did are frighteningly universal. I mean, think about it. The need to belong, the thrill of power, the desire to impress your superiors, the simple mental laziness of just not asking hard questions. These aren't Nazi traits, they are human traits. So when the psychologists looked deep into the minds of these 22 men, they didn't find some creature from a horror film. No, they found something much, much closer to home. They found a reflection of humanity's own potential for darkness. It was a warning that evil doesn't always announce itself with fangs and claws. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed in a uniform, carrying a clipboard, and looking disturbingly, terrifyingly normal. So the real question Nuremberg leaves us with is this: when we look in that same mirror, what do we see in ourselves?